My husband slipped sleeping pills in my tea. When I pretended to sleep, what I saw next shook me. My heart was beating so loud I was sure Brandon could hear it from across the room. I lay there in our queen-sized bed, trying to keep my breathing steady and slow, watching through barely open eyes as my husband of 5 years carefully pried up the wooden floorboards near our bedroom window. This wasn't the Brandon I knew. This wasn't the gentleman who brought me vanilla lattes every morning and kissed my cheek before I left for work at the advertising agency. The person crouched on our bedroom floor in our Chicago townhouse moved with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. His hands worked quickly and silently, lifting each board without making a sound. What I saw next made my blood run cold. Hidden beneath our bedroom floor was a metal box about the size of a shoebox. Brandon opened it like he was handling something precious. And even in the dim light from our hallway, I could see it was packed with papers, photographs, and what looked like several small booklets. Passports. Multiple passports. I wanted to scream. I wanted to jump up and demand answers. But something deep in my gut told me to stay perfectly still, to keep pretending I was unconscious from whatever he had been putting in my chamomile tea. Because yes, I was right about the tea. The bitter aftertaste I'd been ignoring for weeks. The way I'd been falling into such deep sleeps that I couldn't remember anything until morning. The strange feeling that things in our Lincoln Park apartment had been moved while I slept. Brandon had been drugging me. But seeing him now, watching him flip through documents and photographs in that hidden box, I realized the sleeping pills were just the beginning. This was something much bigger and much more terrifying than I had imagined. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. Lying in my own bed, afraid of my own husband. 3 hours earlier, I had been sitting at our granite kitchen counter, staring at the cup of chamomile tea Brandon had just placed in front of me. It was our routine. Every night at 9 p.m., Brandon would brew me a cup of tea while I finished up emails from a Hartwell & Associates account or watched Netflix. He always used the same navy ceramic mug, the one we'd bought at that little shop in Millennium Park, always added exactly 1 teaspoon of wildflower honey, and always waited nearby until I finished drinking it. "Long day at the office?" he asked, settling onto the bar stool across from me. His green eyes looked concerned, caring, the same eyes that had looked at me with love on our wedding day at Navy Pier. "Yeah, the Johnson campaign is giving us trouble," I replied, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. The tea smelled normal, floral and soothing, just like always. But lately, I'd been noticing that bitter undertone, like someone had mixed medicine into it. "You should drink up and get some rest," Brandon said, and I caught something in his voice. Was it eagerness? "You've been working too hard lately." I lifted the mug to my lips, but instead of drinking, I just pretended to take a sip. Brandon was watching me intently, and when I didn't actually swallow, I saw a tiny frown cross his face. "Is something wrong with the tea?" he asked. "No, it's fine. Just hot," I lied, taking another fake sip. This time, I let a tiny bit touch my tongue, and there it was. That bitter chemical taste that definitely didn't belong in chamomile tea. My hands started shaking slightly. After weeks of suspicion, I finally had proof that something was very wrong. "I'm going to use the restroom," Brandon said, standing up. "Finish your tea while I'm gone." "Okay." The moment he left the kitchen, I rushed to the sink and poured the entire cup down the garbage disposal. Then I quickly refilled it with regular water and a tiny bit of honey to make it look like I'd been drinking. My heart was pounding as I heard Brandon's footsteps coming back down the hardwood hallway. "All done," I said, showing him the empty mug when he returned. "Good girl," he said, and something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. "You should head to bed soon. You look tired." He was right. I did look tired. But tonight, I wasn't going to let whatever drug he'd been giving me knock me unconscious. Tonight, I was going to find out what my husband was really doing while I slept. I went through our normal bedtime routine, brushing my teeth and changing into my Northwestern University pajamas while Brandon watched CNN downstairs. When I climbed into bed, I made sure to leave our bedroom door slightly open so I could hear him moving around the apartment. Around 10:30, I heard Brandon turn off the television and walk upstairs. I quickly closed my eyes and tried to make my breathing deep and regular, the way it sounded when I was really asleep. Brandon stood in our doorway for what felt like forever, just watching me. Then he whispered my name. "Amanda. Amanda, are you awake?" I didn't respond. I kept my breathing steady and my body completely still. He said my name louder. Amanda. Still nothing from me. Finally, I heard him walk away, but he didn't go to bed. Instead, his footsteps went back downstairs, and I heard him moving around in his home office. For the next hour, I lay there listening to Brandon make phone calls. I couldn't make out the words, but his voice sounded different, more serious, more businesslike than I'd ever heard it. Sometimes he seemed to be speaking with an accent that I didn't recognize. Around midnight, Brandon came back upstairs. I heard him pause outside our bedroom again, then quietly push the door open wider. My heart was beating so fast I was sure he could see my chest moving, but I forced myself to stay perfectly still. That's when Brandon did something that changed everything. Instead of getting into bed beside me like he had every night for 5 years, he walked over to the window side of our room and knelt down on the floor. I heard a soft scraping sound, like wood against wood, and I risked opening my eyes just a tiny bit. Brandon was prying up the floorboards. 3 weeks earlier, I was just Amanda Foster, an account executive at Hartwell & Associates who thought her biggest problem was landing the Johnson political campaign. I had no idea that my entire life was built on lies. It started on a Tuesday night in early October. I remember because I had just gotten home from a particularly stressful day at work, and Brandon was already in the kitchen preparing dinner. The smell of his famous beef stroganoff filled our little townhouse on Ashland Avenue, and everything felt perfectly normal. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Brandon asked, stirring the sauce with one hand while reaching for my favorite mug with the other. Even after 5 years of marriage, he still made my tea every single night without me having to ask. "Exhausting," I said, dropping my Kate Spade purse by the kitchen counter. "The Johnson people want to change their entire strategy 3 weeks before the election. Riley and I spent 4 hours in meetings today trying to figure out how to make it work." Brandon nodded sympathetically as he filled the electric kettle with water. "That sounds terrible. Good thing you have your tea to help you relax." I smiled at him. Brandon had always been thoughtful like that, remembering the little things that made me happy. When we first started dating, he learned that I loved chamomile tea before bed, and he'd been making it for me ever since. That night, I drank my tea while we watched The Office reruns together on our sectional sofa. Brandon had his arm around me, and I felt safe and loved the way I always did with him. But about halfway through the episode, I started feeling incredibly drowsy. "I think I need to go to bed," I mumbled, my words feeling thick and heavy in my mouth. "Of course, honey, you've had a long day," Brandon said, helping me up from the couch. "I'll be up in a little while." I barely remembered walking upstairs. The next thing I knew, it was morning and my iPhone alarm was going off. I felt groggy and confused, like I was waking up from the deepest sleep of my life. "Morning, beautiful," Brandon said from beside me. He was already dressed for work in his usual khakis and button-down, which was strange because he usually slept later than me. "What time did you come to bed?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. "Oh, around 11, he said casually. "You were sleeping so soundly, I didn't want to wake you." Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I stumbled to the bathroom and noticed that my iPhone was on the nightstand, but I could have sworn I'd left it charging on the dresser. And my MacBook, which I always left open on the desk, was closed. "Brandon," I called out. "Did you move my stuff last night?" "What stuff?" he called back from downstairs. "My phone and laptop. They're not where I left them." "You were pretty tired, Amanda. You probably just forgot where you put them." Maybe he was right. I had been exhausted lately, working long hours on the Johnson campaign. It made sense that I might be more forgetful than usual. But over the next few days, it kept happening. Every night, I would drink my tea, fall into an impossibly deep sleep, and wake up feeling like I'd been unconscious rather than just asleep. And every morning, I would find small things moved around our bedroom. My purse would be in a slightly different position. My work papers would be shuffled. Once I found my laptop warm to the touch in the morning, even though I was sure I'd shut it down the night before. "I think I'm losing my mind," I told my best friend Riley during lunch the following week. We were sitting in our usual spot at the little bistro near our Michigan Avenue office, and I was picking at my Caesar salad while trying to explain the strange feelings I'd been having. "What do you mean?" Riley asked, her brown eyes full of concern. "I keep thinking someone's been going through my stuff while I sleep, but that's crazy, right? It's just Brandon and me in the apartment." Riley frowned. "That doesn't sound crazy to me. What kind of stuff? My laptop, my purse, work documents, little things. And I've been sleeping so deeply lately that I don't remember anything from the time I go to bed until my alarm goes off. How deeply? I thought about it. Like Brandon could probably set off fireworks in our bedroom and I wouldn't wake up. It's not normal, Riley. I've never been that heavy of a sleeper. Riley set down her turkey sandwich and looked at me seriously. Amanda, when did this start? About 3 weeks ago. Right around the time I started working on the Johnson campaign. And you're sure nothing else has changed? No new medications? No changes in your routine? I shook my head, then stopped. Well, Brandon has been making my tea every night, but he's always done that. It's not new. Something flickered across Riley's face, but she didn't say anything right away. What? I asked. Probably nothing, she said carefully. But maybe you should pay attention to how you feel after drinking the tea, just to rule out any allergies or anything like that. That night, I did pay attention. I noticed that the tea tasted slightly different than usual. There was a bitter undertone that I'd been ignoring. And within 30 minutes of finishing the cup, I felt like I could barely keep my eyes open. But the most disturbing thing happened around 2 a.m. I woke up briefly, just for a few seconds, and I could have sworn I heard Brandon's voice coming from downstairs. He was talking to someone, but his voice sounded different, sharper, more serious than I'd ever heard it. When I woke up the next morning, I asked him about it. Were you on the phone last night? Brandon looked surprised. No. Why? I thought I heard you talking to someone. You must have been dreaming, sweetheart. I came to bed right after you did. But I knew what I'd heard. And for the first time in our 5-year marriage, I was starting to wonder if my husband was lying to me. The idea came to me during another sleepless lunch with Riley. We were back at our usual bistro, but this time I could barely eat anything. My stomach was twisted in knots from 2 weeks of growing suspicion about Brandon. I need to know for sure, I told Riley, pushing my untouched Cobb salad around my plate. I can't keep living like this, wondering if I'm going crazy or if something really is happening. Riley leaned forward, lowering her voice. What are you thinking? I want to record myself sleeping. Set up my phone to film the bedroom and see what happens after I drink the tea. Amanda, that's... Riley paused, considering. Actually, that's really smart. If nothing happens, you'll know you're just stressed and maybe you can get some help for the insomnia. But if something is happening, then I'll have proof, I finished. That evening, I felt like I was preparing for the most important performance of my life. I set my iPhone up on the dresser, angled so it could capture most of our bedroom. I made sure it was plugged in so the battery wouldn't die, and I started recording just before Brandon brought up my tea. Here you go, honey, he said, handing me the familiar navy mug. Extra honey tonight. You look like you need it. I forced myself to smile and drink the tea normally, even though every sip of that bitter liquid made me want to gag. Within 20 minutes, the familiar heavy drowsiness began pulling at my eyelids. I'm so tired, I mumbled, which wasn't acting at all. Sleep well, sweetheart, Brandon said, kissing my forehead. I'll be up soon. The last thing I remembered was Brandon turning off the bedroom light. When I woke up the next morning, Brandon was already gone. He'd left a note saying he had an early meeting at Northwestern Memorial Hospital where he claimed to work in IT, and would be back that afternoon. My hands shook as I stopped the recording on my phone and saw that it had captured over 8 hours of footage. I fast-forwarded through the first hour, watching myself toss and turn before finally going completely still. Then around midnight, Brandon appeared in the frame. What I saw made my blood run cold. Brandon didn't just come to bed like he'd been telling me. Instead, he stood over me for several minutes, saying my name and even shaking my shoulder gently. When I didn't respond at all, he smiled. That same cold smile I would later see when he opened his secret box. Then Brandon left the room, and I watched myself lying there like a corpse for another hour before he returned. This time he was carrying my purse. I watched in horror as my husband sat on the edge of our bed and went through every item in my purse. He photographed my driver's license with his phone. He wrote down information from my credit cards. He even opened my work badge and took pictures of both sides. But that wasn't the worst part. After going through my purse, Brandon walked over to my laptop on the desk. I watched him open it. Somehow he knew my password, and spent nearly an hour going through my files. He took pictures of documents from work, copied information from my Gmail, and even accessed my Chase bank account. The whole time I lay there completely unconscious, totally helpless, while my husband violated every aspect of my privacy. Around 3 a.m., Brandon made a phone call. He spoke quietly, but my phone had picked up some of the audio. I turned the volume all the way up and listened carefully. "The timeline is still good," Brandon was saying. "I should have everything I need within the next 2 weeks. No, she doesn't suspect anything. The medication is working perfectly. Yes, I understand the risks, but this one is different. She has access to more resources than the others." "The others? What others?" Brandon's voice continued, but he was speaking so quietly that I couldn't make out the rest of the conversation. When he hung up, he put everything back exactly where he'd found it, kissed my forehead again, and went to sleep beside me like nothing had happened. I sat on my bed that morning staring at my phone screen, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. I called Riley and asked her to meet me for coffee during her lunch break. "I have the recording," I told her the moment she sat down at Starbucks. "And Riley, it's bad. It's really, really bad." I showed her the footage on my phone, watching her face grow pale as she saw Brandon going through my belongings. "Amanda, this isn't just weird behavior," Riley said when the video ended. "This is criminal. He's drugging you and stealing your personal information." "But why? What could he possibly want with my credit card numbers? He has access to all our accounts anyway." Riley was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her mind working. "Amanda," she said finally, "I think you need to consider the possibility that Brandon isn't who you think he is." Riley didn't waste any time. The morning after I showed her the recording, she called in sick to work and spent the entire day digging into Brandon's background. What she found made everything so much worse. "We need to meet somewhere private," Riley said when she called me that afternoon. Her voice sounded shaky, which scared me because Riley was never shaky about anything. "Can you get away from the house?" I told Brandon I was going grocery shopping at Whole Foods and met Riley at Lincoln Park Zoo, about 20 minutes from our neighborhood. She was sitting on a bench overlooking the pond, holding a thick folder in her lap. "Amanda, sit down," she said when she saw me approaching. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be really hard to hear." My legs felt weak as I sat beside her. "What did you find?" Riley opened the folder and pulled out several printed pages. I started with the basics. Brandon's employment history, his social security number, his college records, things that should be easy to verify for someone you've been married to for 5 years. She handed me the first page. It was a printout from the website of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. "I called them this morning and asked to speak with Brandon Foster in their IT department," Riley said. "They told me they've never had an employee by that name." I stared at the page, confused. "That's impossible. Brandon goes to work every day. He gets paychecks. He talks about his co-workers." "I know this is hard, but keep listening," Riley said gently. "I also ran a background check using one of those online services. Amanda, Brandon's social security number doesn't match his name in the government database." She showed me another printout. "And look at this." I searched for Brandon Foster on every social media platform I could think of. His Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn profiles all show the same thing. They were all created 6 years ago. Not updated 6 years ago. Created 6 years ago. My hands were trembling as I looked at the evidence. 6 years ago, but we met 7 years ago. Exactly. Which means Brandon created his entire online identity 1 year before he met you. Amanda, I don't think Brandon Foster is even his real name. I felt like I was going to be sick. That can't be right. We have a marriage certificate. We filed taxes together. How could he fake all of that? Riley pulled out more papers. Identity theft is more common than you think, especially when someone has the right skills and resources. She showed me what she discovered, how someone could assume another person's identity, create false employment records, even fool government agencies if they knew what they were doing. Amanda, Riley said quietly, I think you might be in serious danger. That evening, Riley positioned herself in the parking garage of our building where she could see our windows. We had agreed on a signal, If I was in immediate danger, I would turn our living room lamp on and off 3 times. Detective Maria Santos, whom Riley had contacted that afternoon, was skeptical but agreed to have a patrol car in the area. "We'll need concrete evidence of a crime before we can make an arrest," she had told us. "But if your husband is really planning something, tonight might give us what we need." I went through my normal evening routine, trying to act natural while my heart pounded in my chest. Brandon seemed more relaxed than usual, almost cheerful as he prepared dinner and asked about my day. "You seem happy tonight," I observed, watching him hum while he heated up leftover pizza. "Just thinking about the future," he said with that smile that now made my skin crawl. "I have a feeling things are going to change for us very soon." When 9 o'clock came, Brandon brought me my tea right on schedule. I had practiced this moment all afternoon, how to fake drinking while actually letting the liquid pool in my cheeks, then swallowing just enough to taste bitter but not enough to knock me unconscious. "Drink up, sweetheart," Brandon said, watching me more intently than usual. "You're going to need your rest." Something about the way he said it sent chills down my spine. I pretended to drink the tea while Brandon sat across from me, and I noticed he kept checking his Apple Watch. "I'm feeling tired already," I said after a few minutes, which wasn't entirely acting. Even the small amount I'd swallowed was making me drowsy. "Good," Brandon said. And there was something different in his voice. Something final. "Why don't you head up to bed? I'll be up in a little while." Around 11:30, I heard Brandon's footsteps on the stairs. He stood in our doorway for a long time, then called my name several times. When I didn't respond, he approached the bed and actually lifted my eyelid to check if I was unconscious. Satisfied that I was asleep, Brandon left the room. What happened next confirmed my worst fears. I heard him go into our guest room, followed by the sound of something heavy being moved. Then Brandon returned to our bedroom and walked straight to the window, beginning to pry up those floorboards. This time, I could see everything clearly as he opened that metal box. Along with the cash and fake passports, there were detailed files on women, different women, all around my age. Some of the photos looked like they had been taken without the women knowing. One file made my blood freeze. It contained a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Local Woman Missing." The photo showed a smiling brunette named Jennifer Walsh from Seattle who had disappeared without a trace 2 years ago. Brandon picked up his phone and made a call, speaking in that strange accent I'd heard before. "Everything is on schedule," he said quietly. "The accounts are ready for transfer, and I've got all the documentation I need. Yes, the flight is booked for Thursday. No, there won't be any loose ends this time." Thursday. That was only 2 days away. Then Brandon pulled out a small glass vial filled with clear liquid and a syringe. "Sorry, Amanda," he whispered to my supposedly unconscious form. "But you've served your purpose." I lay frozen in terror, but I managed to grab my phone and text Riley, "Call police now. Brandon planning something Thursday." The next morning, the moment Brandon left for his fake job, Detective Santos and Riley were at my door. When we pried up those floorboards and found all the evidence, the fake IDs, the files on murdered women, the detailed plans with my name on them, Detective Santos immediately called for backup. That evening, we set the trap. I confronted Brandon during dinner, telling him I knew about the drugs, about his real identity, about his plans for Thursday. His mask finally slipped completely. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Amanda," he said, his voice now carrying a thick Eastern European accent. "I'm very good at what I do. And what I do is take everything from women like you, your money, your identity, your life." That's when Detective Santos and her team burst through our door. Brandon, whose real name turned out to be Victor Petrov, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The FBI found evidence linking him to 8 murders across the country, all successful women he had married under false identities. I moved to Denver 6 months later, couldn't stay in Chicago where everything reminded me of the lies. It took years of therapy before I could trust anyone again, before I could drink tea without feeling sick, before I could sleep through the night. But I survived. And now I work with victim services, helping other women who've been targeted by predators like Victor. I share my story because I want other women to know, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And most importantly, you're stronger than you know. Even when the person you trusted most in the world turns out to be your greatest threat, you can survive. You can fight back. You can win. Victor was wrong about one thing. This story was over the moment those handcuffs clicked shut. He's spending the rest of his life in a cage, while I'm living freely, helping other women reclaim their lives from monsters who thought they were too clever to get caught. They never are.